Hello students, now today we will discuss the history class 10 history chapter 4, that is the third part. So today we will start the third part from the 3.3, the rise of mass production and from there. Okay, so rise of mass production and the consumption. In that part we are getting the how the US economy it has recovered quicker and the resumed its strong growth in the early 1920s. Okay, so again it has resumed its strength, economic strength in early 1920s. Now mass production is one of the important feature of the US economy which began in the late 19th century. Okay, so finally the mass production is they have got, and that the important feature of this actually the US economy which began in the late 19th century, they were going for the mass production. Now Henry Ford is a well-known pioneer of mass production, a car manufacturer who established his car plant in Detroit. So Henry Ford, he was a well-known mass producer, pioneer of mass production, and he manufactured this car was a car manufacturer and established his in Detroit, the city of Detroit, and the T model Ford was first mass production car. Okay. So he has introduced a new model of Ford car, that was the T model Ford. Okay, it was the world's first mass produced car, and the Fordist industrial practices soon spread and were also occupied in the 1920s. The demand for refrigerators, washing machine, etc. also boomed, financed once again by loans. Okay, so not only this car manufacturer how he is actually producing the cars, not only that, we are seeing the lots of demands were increased, like refrigerator, washing machine, all these which is actually required in that time. Okay, household things there. Why? Because they are actually financed by the loan. Okay, easily people they are getting through the loan all these communities. Now in 1923 the US resumed exporting capital to the rest of the world and became the largest overseas lender. So in 1923 US, what happened, they have resumed the exporting capital and now it's become the largest overseas lender. Now next part we have to move, that is a very important part, that is the Great Depression. Okay, so how the Great Depression occurs, that we have to go for it. So the period of Great Depression began around 1929 and lasted till mid 1930s, and most parts of the world experienced this declines in production, employment, incomes and trade. Okay, most countries they are actually experience this catastrophic declines of production, employment, incomes and trade. Now means whole world was affected. Okay, so the most affected areas were agriculture regions and the communities. Okay, these two sectors are mostly heated or mostly affected by this. Now combinations of several factors led to depression. The first factor is agriculture overproduction. Second is in the mid 1920s many countries financed their investment through loans from the US. So first one is actually overproduction. Okay, first factor was the agriculture overproduction and second was the most countries of the world they have taken loans from the US. Okay, now the rest of the world is affected by the withdrawal of US loans in different ways. The US was also severely affected by this depression. Okay, and all the countries they are actually withdraw the US loans in different ways, but finally US also be affected by this depression, and unfortunately the US banking system collapsed and thousands of banks went bankrupt and were forced to close. So finally many banks, which is US banks, actually that time it was totally collapsed and bankrupt was there. So finally they are forced to close the banks. So that was the Great Depression we are seeing in US and the rest of the world. Now we have to move that India and the Great Depression. So how in India that Great Depression impacts was there in India. So Indian trade is immediately affected by the depression. The price of agriculture fell sharply, but still the colonial government refused to reduce revenue demands. So how the prices of agriculture goods are actually fell down, but in that situation also colonial government or British government, they are not ready to reduce the revenue demand. So in that depression years, India became an exporter of precious metals, notably gold. So that time India, they are only exporting the precious metals like gold. Okay, and rural India was thus see things with unrest when Mahatma Gandhi launched the civil disobedience movement at the height of the depression in 1931. So in that situation, rural India means in village people actually they feel unrest because Mahatma Gandhi that time he has started a civil disobedience movement, and in the time of the Great Depression, that was in 1931. Okay. Now next part we have to move, that is the rebuilding a world economy, the post-war era. This is the fourth unit. Okay, we are moving to the fourth part now. So 2 decades after the end of the First World War, the Second World War broke out. Okay, so after that again, the Second World War it has started, and it was fought between the Axis powers. Who were there in Axis powers? Nazi Germany, Japan and Italy, and the allies countries were Britain, France and Soviet Union and US. Okay, so the war continued for the 6 year over land, sea and air. So 6 year continuous this war was there. Now in that situation what happened? The war caused an immense amount of economic devastation and social disruption. So First World War, after First World War little bit we can see that it was coming as a stability is coming. That time only the Second World War started, and that is the reason total the amount we are seeing the economic devastation and the social disruption. Okay, now the post-war reconstruction was shaped by two crucial influences. What was that crucial influence? That was the first one is that the US emerged as the dominant economic, political and military power in the Western world. Okay, so US, the country is become a dominant on economic, political and in military power in the Western world, Western part of the world. Okay, and the second was the dominance of the Soviet Union. Okay, so Soviet Union also started to dominate. That these are the two crucial influence we can see. Now the next part it is given, that is the post-war settlements and the Bretton Woods institutions. So we have to know what is Bretton Woods institution, that we have to know from this part. Okay, now two key lessons were drawn out and from the interwar economic experience. So two key lessons we are getting from this interwar economic experience. What was the two key lessons? First lesson is mass production cannot be sustained without mass communication. Okay, so without mass communication never the mass production can be sustained. Okay, and the second lesson related to the country's economic links with the outside world. Okay, so how the country's economic link is there with the outside of the world, that is also important. So the Bretton Woods Conference established the International Monetary Fund. So that Bretton Woods Conference, they have established IMF. Okay, that is a one type of monetary fund. That is this is IMF. Full form of IMF is International Monetary Fund. What the purpose of that? This actually they want to deal with external surpluses and deficit of its members nations. So whatever the external surplus or profits they are getting, that they have to help to the members nation, those who are in deficits. Okay, so the international banks for Reconstruction and Development, which is popularly known as the World Bank, was set up to finance post-war reconstruction. Okay, so they have not only that, whatever the reconstructions are required, okay, in economic reconstruction required, so that for that purposes they have made the World Bank. Okay, that was the reconstruction, International Bank of Reconstruction or Development, which is actually known as a World Bank, that they have set up. Okay, so the IMF and the World Bank that commenced the financial operations in 1947. So this IMF and World Bank, they have started to help financial help, they have started from the 1947. Okay, now the next we have to move, that is the early post-war years. Now, era of unprecedented growth of trade and incomes was inaugurated by the Bretton Woods for the Western industrial nations and Japan. Okay, so this Western industrial nations and for Japan, actually they have started to, that Bretton Woods started to work. Now during this decade, technology and enterprises were spread worldwide. So in this part, in the post-war of Second World War, it was actually that spread worldwide. Okay, technology and enterprises, it was started to spread worldwide. Now decolonization and independence. So in that part, that actually after the end of Second World War, large parts of the world were still under European colonial rule. Okay, so because the Britishers were now till European powers were actually there in that time, so that is the reason that they are actually that European colony rule was there in the rest of the world. So the IMF and the World Bank were designed to meet the financial needs of the industrial countries. So that is the reason IMF and World Bank, they want that they have to meet the financial, which countries are in really in financial crisis, they wants to meet with these countries. Okay, now the IMF and the World Bank from the late 1950s shift their attention more towards the developing countries, but from 1950s, actually this IMF and World Bank, they started to help towards the developing countries. Okay, they are giving more attention to this developing countries, and most developing countries were not benefited from the fast growth of the Western economies experienced in the 1950s to 1960s. So most of the developing countries, actually they were not benefited till from 1950s to 1960s. In that time they are not getting that much of benefited. So they organize, so these countries, they have organized a group which is known as a group of 77 or G77, and they demand a new international economic order or NIEO. Okay, so this G77 or group 77, these developing countries, they want a new international economic order, and new meant a system that would give them real control over their natural resources, more development assistance, fairer prices for raw materials, and better access for the manufactured goods in developed countries market. So through that new, actually they want that they will also get their freedom in the market. They want the real control over the natural resources of their country, and the more developed assistance and the fairer prices of raw materials when they will sell to the outside of the market, means outside of their country. Okay, and the manufactured goods also, they will get the good market, they will get developed countries market, they will get. Okay, now the next part, it is the end of Bretton Woods and the beginning of the globalization. So now the US finance and the competitive strength were weakened due to the rising cost of its overseas involvements from the 1960s. So now US finance, it has started to weaken from the 1960s. Okay, because overseas involvement started from that time, and in the mid 1970s, the international financial system also changed, and the industrial world was also hit by unemployment. So from the mid 1970s, again the scenario has changed. The industrial world has also hit by the unemployment. Now that time the MNC began to shift their production to low wage Asian countries, and MNC they moved to the low wages Asian countries like China. Okay, China became the attractive destination for the investment for foreign MNCs. So MNCs they are moving towards the Asian countries like China. Okay, not only China, in the last 2 decades the world's economic geography has been transformed as the countries such as India, China, Brazil have undergone rapid economic transformation. So from the last 2 decades we can see the whole economic geography has been changed, transformed. Okay, and the Asian countries like India, China, and that side Brazil also have going for the rapid economic transformation we can see in this country. So now student, I hope this class you have understood. Now our chapter has completed, so go for this chapter, read at least twice and then see the video. You can understand the chapter. Thank you to all of you. Thank you.